Belethor begins his mornings long before Whiterun fully wakes, rising in the gray half-light when the candles in his shop have burned down to thin stubs, and the chill of the early air clings to the wooden walls like a lingering guest reluctant to leave. And in these quiet moments, before the marketplace erupts into its usual blend of chatter and footsteps, he moves slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders while listening to the muffled sounds of the city stirring, the soft clop of a distant horse, the creak of shutters opening somewhere near the Gildergreen. Faint echoes carried gently by the breeze that sweeps down from the plains, and as he lights the lanterns around his counter one by one, the warm glow spreads across shelves cluttered with trinkets from a dozen different places, oddities collected through journeys he rarely speaks about in detail. Some items acquired honestly, others acquired through the charming flexibility that defines his sense of business. A philosophy where coin is king and principles bow politely out of the way whenever profit approaches. He tidies the front of the store with a methodical care that hints at routine rather than passion, adjusting the angle of a silver goblet so it catches the lantern light just right, brushing away invisible dust from a carved wooden mask that he insists is rare, despite no one ever believing him, and tightening the straps of a battered satchel hanging behind the counter whose contents change depending on what he thinks might sell that day. Because Belethor does not simply run a general goods store, he runs an ever-shifting marketplace of opportunity wrapped in a smile that always seems to know more than it says. When the sun finally crests over the horizon and spills through the windows, he unlocks the front door with the same dramatic twist of his wrist he uses every day, calling out his familiar greeting into the empty air as if the world itself is already listening, a theatrical flourish that prepares him for the parade of buyers, sellers, wanderers, and adventurers who will eventually wander inside, seeking anything from healing potions to old books whose pages smell like dust and forgotten stories. As the first citizens begin to drift into the square, he watches them with a merchant's eye, picking apart their posture and clothing to guess what they might need before they know themselves, the tight grip on a satchel suggesting an item they're afraid to sell but desperate to trade, the worn boots hinting at a long journey and a willingness to spend generously for supplies. And he smiles to himself with a mixture of calculation and genuine fondness, because despite his reputation for valuing coin above all else, Belethor genuinely enjoys the dance of commerce, the back and forth rhythm that makes Whiterun feel alive. As the morning swells into full day and the city's heartbeat steadies, he leans casually against the counter, arms folded, humming a tune he heard from a bard long ago, while tapping his foot in time with the muffled clamor outside, letting the noise wash over him like a familiar song. And when the door finally creaks open, he straightens instantly, slipping into his role as effortlessly as a man putting on a well-worn coat. To each customer, he offers the same practiced warmth, greeting them as though they are old friends, returning from faraway places, even if they have never met. And while many know him for his famously bold promise that he will buy anything his customers aren't using, including their very last breath, the truth behind that line is softer, a small theatrical spark meant to make people laugh, relax, and perhaps loosen their grip on whatever goods they've carried into his store. Throughout the day, he drifts between shelves like a conductor managing an orchestra only he can hear, restocking health potions with one hand while haggling lightly with a traveler over the price of an iron helmet, his voice effortlessly balancing charm and pressure as he nudges negotiations toward the outcome most favorable to him without the customer ever noticing the gentle steering of his words. Belethor is not cruel, nor is he dishonest. He simply lives by the idea that commerce is a game, and he intends to be the best player on the field. In quiet stretches between customers, he stands at the window watching the city with a contemplative expression most people never see, following the movement of guards crossing the square, the sway of the Gildergreen's branches in the breeze, the steady bustle of travelers climbing the steps to Dragon's Reach, with letters, requests, or hopes heavy in their pockets. Sometimes he imagines what his life might have been had he traveled beyond Whiterun more often, had he kept wandering instead of settling into the warm, predictable rhythm of shopkeeping. But each time such thoughts arise, they dissolve as quickly as they form, replaced by the practical comfort of knowing he has carved out a corner of the world that is his and his alone. By afternoon, the air in the shop grows warm from lanterns and breath and the constant swing of the door, and Belethor feels a familiar satisfaction settle into his bones with every sale made, every coin stacked neatly into small piles behind the counter, each clink of septims forming a quiet pulse that marks the passage of the day. He jokes with regulars, teases indecisive shoppers with exaggerated sighs, and occasionally charms a passing adventurer into buying something they absolutely do not need, but convince themselves they cannot live without. A small victory he celebrates with a discreet grin before returning to the steady flow of business. As evening approaches and the golden light slips across the wooden floor in long stripes, Belethor listens to the marketplace outside begin to wind down, the voices growing softer, the footsteps fewer, the city easing into the gentle calm that comes after sunset. He closes the door late, later than he needs to, because he likes the feeling of being one of the last gazes of lamplight in the drifting dark, the warm glow spilling into the square as if welcoming anyone still wandering the streets to step inside for a moment of refuge. When he finally douses the lanterns, leaving only a single candle flickering behind the counter, he sits with his ledger in the soft hush of closing hours, running his fingers along the pages and tallying the numbers with the contented air of a man who understands that stability is its own kind of treasure. The night grows deeper, the city quiets completely, and Belethor leans back in his chair, listening to the soft creak of the wood settling around him, the sounds of a shop that has become as familiar to him as breath itself. And eventually, when the final candle burns low, he retires to the small room behind the store, closing his eyes with the comfortable weight of a day well spent, knowing that tomorrow he will rise again into the same soft dawn, ready to greet the world with a smile, a pitch, and the endless rhythm of Whiterun's humble merchant life. Belethor wakes before the rest of Whiterun stirs, rising from his modest bed above the shop as the faint light of dawn spills across the wooden boards, turning the dust motes in the air into drifting flecks of gold that shimmer like lazy fireflies. He moves slowly, stretching his shoulders while listening to the muffled sounds of the city in its earliest moments, that familiar hum of a place still half asleep yet steadily remembering its purpose. He lights a single candle on the small table beside the stairs, and the flame flickers softly as if greeting him, casting warm shapes along the walls that he's seen 1,000 times but still finds oddly comforting. Before going downstairs, he takes a moment to examine the ledgers from the night before, tracing his fingers along lines of numbers he's memorized so thoroughly that he can tell when even one digit is out of place. Then, with a quiet exhale, he descends into the main floor of the shop, his footsteps deliberately slow so the old boards don't creak too loudly. He opens the shutters just enough to let the early morning light seep in, letting it spill across displays filled with an eclectic mix of goods, mixing bowls beside daggers, quills beside ancient-looking scrolls, potions stacked next to mismatched boots, and a lute whose strings he keeps tuned only because the silence feels emptier without its faint, humming presence. Every item has a story, and he can recall where he found each one, who used to own it, or how long it sat unsold, waiting for the right wanderer to appreciate it. Some he keeps on the shelves not because they're valuable, but because he likes the way they decorate the space, little bursts of character that make the shop feel like an extension of his own restless personality. Before opening for business, he cleans the counter with a cloth that's fraying around the edges, muttering to himself about how he should replace it but inevitably never does, because the old fabric fits his hand in a way new things never quite manage. He adjusts the position of a cracked lantern, wipes fingerprints off the glass display case, and rearranges a row of gemstones so that the colors create an appealing gradient. Half of these motions aren't necessary, but he performs them out of habit, the comfortable ritual of someone who's spent countless mornings preparing for customers who may or may not buy anything at all. When he finally opens the front door and props it with a simple wooden wedge, a gentle breeze flows inside, carrying the distant scent of the Gilder Green and the soft murmur of people beginning their day around Whiterun's market district. Belethor inhales deeply, letting the chill of the morning settle in his lungs, the kind of air that wakes the mind without startling it. The first people to pass by rarely stop in, usually guards heading to their posts or townsfolk walking briskly toward their morning chores, but he greets them all the same with nods or quiet remarks, small hints of charm meant to plant the idea that a visit to his shop wouldn't be a waste of time. He enjoys these fleeting interactions, the way some smile back automatically while others avert their eyes, determined not to be lured into browsing wares they don't intend to buy. When the first actual customer enters a traveler or a hunter or perhaps a blacksmith on break, he shifts into the rhythm of sales with practiced ease, offering compliments on equipment, casually pointing out items they didn't come in for, and speaking in a tone that makes it clear he both appreciates their business and can't resist trying to earn a few extra coins by suggesting something unnecessary but enticing. He takes pride in the dance of it, the subtle suggestions, the playful charm, and the way customers sometimes leave with items they never expected to want, especially when he tells them that if there's anything he doesn't currently sell, he can certainly find it. When business slows, he steps outside to lean against the wooden frame of his shop, watching the marketplace come alive around him. Carlotta carries crates of vegetables with steady determination, while Adrienne sparks her forge into life with the fierce glow of early flames reflecting off her armor. Belethor watches them work with genuine admiration, even if he occasionally jokes about their professions when customers are within earshot. He returns inside to update his inventory, carefully counting coins and adjusting prices based on demand, seasonal changes, or simply intuition. He sometimes talks to himself while working, voicing thoughts about potential sales, new items he hopes to acquire, or curious rumors he's heard from passing adventurers. Occasionally, he pulls an object from storage and inspects it with quiet wonder, remembering that he once entertained dreams of adventure before accepting that trade suited him better. Though he rarely admits it aloud, there's a certain contentment in the stability of his shop, in the rhythms of commerce, in the soft clatter of coins sliding into a drawer. But he also likes listening to stories from travelers, tales of dragons circling the mountains, ancient crypts echoing with the voices of the dead, and hidden treasures untouched by time. Even if he doesn't travel anymore, he collects these stories the same way he collects merchandise, storing them like precious keepsakes. He likes imagining the faraway places described in hushed tones, places he might never see but can picture vividly thanks to the enthusiasm of the people who wander inside, with dust still clinging to their boots. As midday approaches, sunlight warms the wooden floors of the shop, and the air fills with the gentle hum of activity from the market outside. Belethor makes himself a small lunch, a piece of bread, a wedge of cheese, and maybe a sweet roll if he's feeling indulgent, and eats at the counter while watching the door, ready to greet the next customer at a moment's notice. During quiet periods, he rifles through storage crates in the back room, marveling at items he forgot he even owned, occasionally finding something that sparks ideas for new displays or clever sales pitches. Sometimes he speaks softly to items as he handles them, half joking, half affectionate, the way someone does when alone long enough to form bonds with the objects that surround them. He checks his books again in the afternoon, adjusting tiny details in the ledger while listening to the muffled sounds of the city distant smithing hammers, chatter from the market stalls, the rhythmic trot of horses passing by the main gates. When customers enter during these hours, he greets them with renewed energy, knowing that the quieter afternoons often draw in travelers tired from long journeys, and he delights in hearing the weary cadence of people who have stories etched into their armor and cloaks. He never asks too many questions, just enough to keep them talking, to hear hints of the world beyond Whiterun's walls. Sometimes he gives small discounts to those who look particularly worn, though he always disguises it as a limited time deal or a special offer to preserve the image of a shrewd businessman. As evening approaches, Belethor feels the weight of the day settle gently across his shoulders, not as fatigue, but as the warm exhaustion that comes from steady work. He steps outside once more to watch the sun dip behind Dragon's Reach, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, while the torches around the city flicker to life. When he closes the shop for the night, he does so slowly, savoring the final moments of the day's rhythm. He locks the door, lowers the shutters, and extinguishes the lanterns one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the candle he carries upstairs. He climbs back to his quarters, sets the candle on the small table beside his bed, and removes his boots with a quiet sigh. Before he sleeps, he takes one last look at the ledgers, not out of necessity but out of habit, and the numbers reassure him with their steady patterns. He lies down beneath the thin blanket, hearing the gentle whisper of nighttime settling over Whiterun, the distant call of the watchman, and the faint rustle of wind moving through the streets. Belethor allows his mind to drift through the events of the day, faces he saw, items he sold, conversations he enjoyed, until the thoughts blur into a soft haze. Sleep takes him gradually, like a warm tide pulling him into dreams woven from lantern light, the smell of polished wood, and the comforting quiet of a life built on small exchanges, familiar routines, and the peaceful hum of a shop that has become both his livelihood and his sanctuary. Morning in Whiterun always arrives gently, like the city is stretching its arms after a long, quiet dream. But for Belethor, the day truly begins only when he feels the weight of his shop key in the palm of his hand. It is a key he has handled 10,000 times, yet still flips absent-mindedly between his fingers as he pushes open the doors to Belethor's general goods. The wood creaks the same way it always does, right side first, left side second, and Belethor finds a strange comfort in that tiny, familiar sound. The shop smells faintly of dust, pine shelves, and whatever old potions he accidentally cracked open last week. It is a scent that would bother anyone else, but to him it is simply the smell of home, business, and the constant swirl of opportunity that hides in every drawer, crate, and corner. He moves inside with slow steps, the type of shuffling that comes from a man who stayed up too late counting septims and convincing himself that tomorrow, without question, will finally be the day someone buys the decorative plate he has been trying to get rid of since before the Great War. He closes the doors behind him, and the quiet settles around him in a soft, dusty blanket. The morning light slips through the windows in pale gold beams, casting perfect columns of brightness over stacks of books and barrels of miscellaneous trinkets. Belethor likes this part of the morning most, the hush, the solitude, the few minutes where the world feels paused and nothing is required of him except to breathe. He lights the lanterns one by one, watching each flame flutter awake, dancing uncertainly before settling into steady, warm glows. As the shop brightens, it reveals the slight disarray he always promises himself he'll fix later. A crate leaning too far left, a collection of goblets scattered without proper order, a small mountain of helmets waiting to be polished. Belethor surveys it all with an expression somewhere between amusement and resignation. Looks like someone was busy yesterday, he mutters to himself, even though he knows full well it was him who created the chaos. There is a rhythm to his morning tasks. Straighten the shelves, check the display chest, reposition the stuffed bear head that keeps tilting forward like it's trying to escape the wall. He lifts the pelts, rearranges the jewelry cases, and taps the coin box twice to ensure no one tampered with it overnight. As he tidies, he hums a half-forgotten Breton tune, one his father used to whistle while bargaining in markets far more crowded than Whiterun's. The melody wanders unevenly, drifting between memories and habit. Belethor has always been a man shaped by trade, raised by merchants, surrounded by noise, and taught from a young age that the world runs on both stories and septums, and the best traders know how to sell both. Once the shop is tidy by Belethor's definition, at least he moves toward the counter and begins the ritual of inspecting the day's inventory. Every morning, he rediscovers items he forgot he owned, surprised and delighted despite knowing that they've been here for months. A chipped Dwemer plate, a potion with an unlabeled cork, a battered iron shield that looks more suited for decoration than combat. He runs his fingers over the items with a familiarity that borders on affection. Some merchants grow attached to customers. Belethor, instead, grows attached to stock. Isolde stops by before dawn breaks fully, the way she does almost every morning. She never stays long, just long enough to wave through the window or step inside to ask if he has any mammoth tusks or fine clothes she can purchase cheaply. Belethor always puts on a confident grin, pretending he has exactly what she needs even before she asks. But she sees through him every time, smiling warmly as she reminds him that she'll check back later. Her presence is quick but grounding, like a small anchor dropped into the tide of Belethor's thoughts. As she leaves, Belethor straightens his vest, clears his throat, and practices the same phrases he uses on customers. "Everything's for sale, my friend," he murmurs to himself. "Everything. If I had a sister, I'd sell her in a second." He pauses, debating whether that joke is too much or just enough to get a chuckle. Belethor has always been a performer as much as a merchant, and the counter is his stage. If he can make someone laugh, they often buy more. If he can make them comfortable, they return. And if he can make them curious, they browse. A browsing customer is a potential sale. That is Belethor's philosophy in a nutshell. When the city outside grows louder and footsteps begin to echo along the cobblestones, Belethor unlocks the front doors and swings them open with rehearsed enthusiasm. The morning air floods into the shop, cool and crisp, carrying with it the sounds of the gildergreen leaves rustling gently in the breeze, the faint clatter of blacksmiths at war maidens, and the distant shouts of guards doing their rounds. Whiterun breathes its warm, living breath into his store, and the day truly begins. The first customer of the morning is almost always the same: a farmer, hunter, or someone passing through the market on their way to the gates. Belethor welcomes them with the same bright smile, leaning across the counter just slightly, like he has been anticipating their arrival. He knows how to read footsteps. The hesitant ones belong to shy buyers, the heavy ones to warriors looking for supplies, and the clanking echoes to someone wearing armor that doesn't fit properly. Every step tells a story, and Belethor prepares his responses accordingly. He greets them with practiced warmth, his voice rising and falling with the ease of a trained salesman. The customer browses, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, and Belethor watches with the soft pride of a man who has curated every shelf with intention. He knows which objects catch which eyes. He watches them pick up an amethyst, or a set of iron boots, or a potion of minor healing, and he tells a gentle, humorous story about each one, not to deceive, but to enrich. He genuinely enjoys the theater of selling. The item, the buyer, and the story must harmonize, and Belethor is always conducting. When someone comes in asking to sell goods, his demeanor shifts slightly, not deceptive, but calculating in a friendly, businesslike way. He examines each item with exaggerated care, holding it up to the light, squinting as if analyzing ancient craftsmanship. He rotates it, weighs it in his hand, and inhales through his teeth before offering a price just low enough to be profitable, but high enough to seem fair. And even when the customer grumbles, Belethor laughs through it gently, assuring them he is taking a noble risk by purchasing such fine wares. Between customers, the shop quiets again, and Belethor busies himself with rearranging the same shelf 10 times over. He does this not out of necessity, but because movement helps keep the loneliness away. Being a shopkeeper means long stretches of silence, and Belethor fills those with soft muttering, humming, and carefully writing notes about imaginary orders he promises himself he'll fulfill someday. Occasionally, Lucia or Braith peek through the windows, watching with a mixture of curiosity and mischief. Belethor catches them sometimes, offering a playful wink or calling out that he has candy for sale, though he never actually stocks candy. The children giggle and run off, leaving him smiling in the doorway. He never admits it aloud, but he enjoys the attention, the sense that his shop is part of the neighborhood's heartbeat. Around midday, Belethor prepares his lunch: a small loaf of bread, some goat cheese, and whatever roasted meat he purchased cheaply the night before. He eats behind the counter, listening to the muffled bustle of the market outside. The day grows warmer, the sunlight deeper, and the rhythm of customers flows in gentle waves, sometimes steady, sometimes sparse. Though Belethor seldom admits it, he enjoys the quiet moments between crowds, the soft crackle of lanterns, the way dust floats lazily in the air, the contentment of knowing he has nowhere else he needs to be. The world may change, dragons may return, and wars may erupt across Skyrim, but in this little shop, the small rituals of trade feel timeless. And as afternoon settles over Whiterun, Belethor leans against his counter, tapping his fingers to a silent beat, ready to greet the next wanderer who pushes open the doors. He straightens his vest once more, clears his throat, and prepares his favorite line with a small, knowing smile. Because in Belethor's world, every new customer is a tiny doorway to possibility, a chance for connection, a chance for conversation, and, of course, a chance for profit, preferably lots of it. Belethor's day drifts into its quieter middle hours like a breeze slipping through the marketplace, the chaos of morning sales fading into a gentler hum that wraps the shop in a warm stillness he secretly treasures. Around this time, when the sun angles through the front windows just right, and dust motes swirl like tiny travelers wandering down from the rafters, he takes the opportunity to tidy the place with a deliberate calmness that feels almost ceremonial. He lifts each trinket, each carved mask, each gleaming dagger from its place, not out of necessity, but out of a kind of affection, letting his fingers brush across the surfaces of goods gathered from a dozen lives and 100 wandering roads. Every item holds a sliver of someone else's story, and even if he'd never admit it aloud, he enjoys imagining where they came from. A silver goblet rescued from a collapsed crypt carries a smell of deep stone and forgotten feasts, while a battered wooden flute still bears faint marks from hands that loved it long ago. In the quiet, he polishes everything slowly, listening to the gentle creak of the floorboards as the shop settles around him, embracing the stillness like an old friend. Now and then, a passerby will peer through the window, considering stepping inside before moving on, leaving Belethor with nothing but the soft echo of footsteps fading down the street. He doesn't mind the lull. It gives him time to check ledgers, adjust price tags to match his ever-changing whims, and mutter to himself about margins, opportunities, and the curiosity of a world where an enchanted ring can sit unsold for days while a cracked ceramic bowl disappears the moment he turns his back. Occasionally, he sits behind the counter and lets his thoughts wander, imagining far-off caravans that might one day deliver treasures worthy of his displays, or picturing himself in some golden city beyond Skyrim, where merchants gather under lantern-lit banners to trade wonders without the constant threat of frost or dragons. But inevitably, his attention drifts back to the shop as it exists, small, cluttered, warm, and alive with the soft scent of leather and old paper. A gentle sigh escapes him as he leans back in his chair, the wood groaning in familiar protest, and he lets his eyes rest half-closed while the afternoon light settles in a quiet glow across the counter. Even in silence, the shop feels full of stories, of possibilities, of the comforting weight of a life built between shelves and coin pouches. And as he listens to the nearly inaudible heartbeat of Whiterun pulsing through the marketplace walls, he finds a rare moment of contentment, a brief but peaceful space where he thinks to himself that for all his ambitions and all the world's wild roads, the quiet afternoon hours in his shop might be the part of his life he cherishes most. Belethor wakes before the sun most days, though he swears he hates early mornings more than he hates haggling with a Nord, who insists a cracked pot is an ancient Dwemer relic. Dawn in Whiterun always arrives gently, slipping through the high windows of his shop in narrow beams that land across shelves cluttered with curiosities of every imaginable size. Belethor lies in his small cot for a moment, listening to the muffled hum of a city stretching awake. He hears the distant clang of Eorland sharpening a blade, the rhythmic sweep of a broom from Carlotta's stall, and the faint murmur of a guard exchanging pleasantries with a stable hand. These sounds are his alarm clock, more reliable than any rooster. They remind him that the world outside will soon expect his door to be unlocked and his smile to be convincingly enthusiastic. He swings his feet to the floor, muttering about stiff knees and too many hours spent counting coins by candlelight, then dresses in his usual merchant's attire with the resignation of a man who knows he will spend the next 12 hours pretending everything in his shop is worth its weight in gold. As he descends the stairs, the familiar musk of old wood, lavender polish, and dust greets him like an old friend. Belethor actually likes that smell, though he would never admit it aloud. He finds comfort in knowing that the shop retains its own distinct scent, a blend of history and harmless neglect. Before unlocking the door, he straightens a few displays that manage to look crooked overnight, adjusting a row of potions that will probably sit untouched for days, and nudging a candlestick a few inches to the left because it seems more pleasing that way. Inventory management is something he pretends to hate, but there is a strange satisfaction in putting order to chaos. He checks drawers, taps boxes, and gives his counter a firm knock as if testing the sturdiness of a bridge. Everything is in place. Everything is as it should be. With a small sigh, he unlatches the door, letting in the first breath of cool morning air and the immediate sound of footsteps from passers-by starting their errands for the day. the flow of customers begins slowly, like trickles of water finding their way through a stream bed. The first few are always the same kinds of people: a traveler in need of basic supplies, a local searching for a gift, an adventurer wanting to sell wolf pelts still damp with dew. Belethor greets each one with his signature mix of forced charm and opportunistic enthusiasm, slipping easily into his practiced rhythms. He listens to complaints about prices with the patience of a priest and responds with suave confidence that convinces most people that he is offering the deal of a lifetime. He enjoys this dance more than he lets on. There is a strange joy in the way people haggle, the little flicker of triumph they show when they think they've bested him. Belethor lets them have that moment. It costs him nothing, and it makes them feel better walking out with whatever trinket caught their eye. Throughout the morning, he fields questions that range from reasonable to absurd. Someone asks if he buys mammoth tusks, which he does, provided the supplier isn't lying about where they came from. Another asks if he can identify a mysterious potion with no label, which he absolutely can't, but he swirls it theatrically and says something vague about restoration magic before politely suggesting they ask Arcadia instead. Most questions involve whether or not he has something in stock that he very clearly has on display within arm's reach. Belethor hides his exasperation behind a polished smile, gesturing with overly graceful movements that make it seem like he's revealing hidden treasures rather than pointing to an obvious shelf. By midday, the warmth inside the shop begins to build. Belethor props the door open to invite a bit of breeze, and the sounds of the city drift in with it. Children chasing each other near the Gilder Green, the forge hammer ringing like a heartbeat, merchants calling out their produce, guards trading rumors about bandits on the road. Belethor pretends to ignore most of it, but he listens more than anyone suspects. He likes knowing what happens in his city, not out of nosiness, but because it makes him feel connected. For all his posturing, Belethor cares deeply about Whiterun. He has sold boughs to hunters who never returned from the wilds, potions to warriors who later marched out with the companions, and keepsakes to families celebrating joys or mourning losses. He stands at the crossroads of stories, even if he isn't the hero of any of them. Sometimes he catches himself leaning on the counter, eyes drifting to the doorway as if expecting someone specific to walk in. Belethor will never confess it, but he enjoys conversations with regulars more than he does selling them anything. The quick-witted banter, the familiarity, the way certain people brighten the room by simply existing in it, those are the moments he cherishes. A merchant's life can be lonely if he lets it be, but Belethor makes sure to wrap himself in the comfort of other people's presence. Even when the day grows long, even when his feet ache and his patience thins, he rarely regrets keeping the shop open. This little wooden box filled with oddities is his world, and he knows it better than he knows himself. In the late afternoon, Belethor takes a brief break. He steps outside to stretch his legs, breathing in the fresh air that rolls down from the plains. He watches the bustle of Whiterun with the quiet pride of someone who knows he contributes in his own small way. He chats with Adrienne for a moment, teases Mikael if the bard is nearby, and sometimes offers Brenuin a bit of coin if the beggar looks especially weary. These interactions recharge him, grounding him in a routine that has become as natural as breathing. When he steps back into his shop, the dust motes swirl in the slanted sunlight, and he feels oddly grateful for the life he leads. It isn't glamorous, but it is steady, familiar, and filled with the kind of everyday beauty most people overlook. As the sun dips low, Belethor returns to his counter for the final rush of customers. Evening shoppers have a certain urgency, travelers wanting to restock before leaving at dawn, townsfolk realizing they forgot something essential, adventurers eager to sell loot from their latest delve. Belethor handles each person with the same blend of charm and subtle exasperation that has become his trademark. If they push too hard, he jokes that he'd sell his own sister if he had one, and if they seem lost, he guides them gently toward what they need. His shop becomes a warm lantern in the fading light, a place where strangers and locals alike feel comfortable lingering as night draws near. When he finally closes the door and pockets the key, Belethor stands in the quiet dimness of his shop, looking around with a soft, unspoken affection. The shelves lean just slightly, the jars don't match, the wood squeaks underfoot, but it's his. This cluttered little corner of Whiterun is the center of his universe, and every item within it tells a tiny fragment of a story he helped shape. As he extinguishes the lamps one by one, the room settles into stillness, waiting patiently for the next dawn when Belethor will rise again, complain theatrically, and open the door to another day full of haggling, humor, and the gentle heartbeat of a city he secretly loves. Belethor always claims the afternoons are his favorite, though he never says why, slipping instead into that familiar mix of charm and sarcasm the moment someone asks. But the truth is that the hours after lunch are when his shop feels the most alive. The sun reaches the perfect angle through the front windows, turning every glass bottle into a tiny lantern and every polished trinket into a spark of warm gold, and Belethor likes the way the light makes his cluttered shelves look worth far more than they are. He moves through the shop with a slow, practiced rhythm, adjusting price tags by a few extra septims whenever he's in a good mood, humming to himself as he straightens baskets or wipes the dust from merchandise that has likely been sitting there since before the Great War. At some point, the courier always passes by, pausing to hand him an overdue bill or a letter from some supplier he hasn't paid, and Belethor just waves it off with a grin, muttering about how the world always wants something from him but never appreciates what he gives. The bell above the door rings every so often, and each customer brings a little moment of entertainment: an alchemist needing something obscure, a traveler pawning off a rusty weapon, a guard pretending he's only browsing but actually keeping an eye out for stolen goods he suspects Belethor bought without asking too many questions. Between customers, Belethor leans against the counter and watches the flow of Whiterun outside, listening to the distant clang of the Skyforge, the horses snorting from the stables, and the market stalls calling out their familiar pitches. Sometimes he glances at the empty space on the shelf where he keeps the coin box locked away, imagining it heavier than it really is, because hope, in Belethor's mind, is just another skill a merchant must learn to sell to himself before he can sell it to others. He thinks of the people who walked through his door earlier in the day, the mother who haggled fiercely over a children's toy, the farmhand who needed a clean shirt for a festival, the adventurer who smelled like troll blood and insisted on selling a chipped sword for nearly full price, and he smiles because every one of them paid something, even if it wasn't coin. Story, frustration, humor, a moment of interaction. Belethor values all of it more than he'll ever admit. He lets the quiet settle in again and begins arranging a new display, stacking items in a way that makes sense only to him. He talks to the objects as he works, calling them his little profit makers, promising each one that it will find a new home soon, even though he knows half of them never will. But the act of arranging them makes him feel in control of something, even in a world where dragons circle the skies and politics shift like wind. As the hour drifts on, Belethor checks on Sigurd outside, making sure he hasn't wandered off or gotten himself caught in another conversation he can't escape from. Sigurd waves, tired but loyal, and Belethor nods approvingly, grateful in his own grumbling way. Then he steps back inside, locks the door for a moment of privacy, and counts his morning earnings. The amount is never as high as he hoped, never as low as he feared. Always something that keeps him hovering in that strange balance between collapse and comfort. The exact line where Belethor has lived his entire life. He sighs, but he smiles too, because the day isn't over yet, and there are still a few more hours for customers to wander in, for bargains to be made, for coins to change hands with that little satisfying clink that always makes his heart beat just a little faster. And in the golden afternoon glow of his cluttered little shop, Belethor feels, for a moment, that everything is exactly as it should be, even if he would sell it all in a heartbeat for the right price. Belethor always claimed he could hear profit the same way other men heard the wind soft at first, barely more than a hint, but unmistakable once you knew how to listen. And on certain evenings, when the market district fell into that late-day quiet where shadows lengthened across the cobblestones and even Heimskir's sermons grew tired at the edges, he swore there was a hum in the air that told him tomorrow would be busy. Tonight was one of those evenings. The lantern above his door flickered gently, its glow catching the dust that drifted in sleepy spirals through the shop, and Belethor moved from shelf to shelf with the slow, deliberate steps of a man performing a ritual older than himself, rearranging bottles of ale that rarely sold, straightening baskets that never stayed in place, shifting trinkets whose origins he barely remembered. The act wasn't necessary. No one cared whether the candlesticks sat on the left or the right, but it calmed him. It made the world feel predictable in a city where dragons flew over roofs and guards argued endlessly about their old injuries. Before closing the shop, Belethor always checked the back corner where the smallest items lay. He had learned long ago that it was these pieces, buttons, wooden toys, cracked rings, that revealed the truest measure of Whiterun's mood. If the toys sold, it meant travelers with families had passed through. If the rings disappeared, someone in the city was preparing for a proposal, and if nothing moved for days at a time, it meant the winds of Skyrim were turning cold with uncertainty again. Tonight, a wooden horse was missing, which meant some parent or traveler had needed a token of comfort. Belethor allowed himself a small smile. Even in a land as hard as Skyrim, softness survived in little ways. Before locking up, he took inventory one more time. It wasn't about counting items. Belethor cared little for exact numbers unless gold was involved. Instead, he surveyed the room like a storyteller reviewing the cast of a play. Each object had its own tale. The cracked vase from a wandering merchant who claimed it came from Morrowind. The pair of boots supposedly worn by a courier who outran a pack of wolves. The old lute missing 3 strings, but still capable of humming when the wind pushed through the doorway. Belethor liked imagining that one day all of these forgotten relics would find new owners who would continue their stories. He supposed that was what made his shop important, even if no one else saw it. He didn't just sell goods, he passed memories from one wanderer to another. Night settled over Whiterun with a quiet kind of certainty, and Belethor blew out the lanterns, one by one. The last flame clung stubbornly to its wick, as if reluctant to let go of the day, and the merchant found himself whispering, "Not yet, friend," before pinching it out. It was silly, talking to a lantern. But when you worked alone as much as he did, the objects in the shop became companions of a sort. They never talked back, never judged, never asked how a Breton ended up calling a Nord city home. They were content to simply exist, as he himself tried to be. Outside, the sky above Dragon's Reach shimmered with the first hints of night, stars blinking one by one into existence like embers in a dying forge. Belethor pulled his coat tight and walked slowly through the market, listening to the city unwind. The soft creak of banners swaying in the breeze, the low murmur of evening conversations drifting from porch to porch, the rhythmic footfalls of the last guard patrol making their rounds. Whiterun felt gentler after dusk, as though the entire city exhaled once its responsibilities were done. He often lingered here at night, just long enough to remind himself that Whiterun wasn't merely the place where he worked, it was the place where he lived, where he belonged, even if he'd never say those words aloud. He passed by the Gildergreen and tilted his head up to look at it, as he always did. Some days it looked alive, some days it looked exhausted. Tonight it seemed quiet but watchful, its branches stretching like tired arms under the moonlight. Belethor liked to imagine that the ancient tree judged every passer-by, not harshly, but knowingly. He wondered what it thought of him, a merchant who sold everything, including, as he often joked, his own sister. He chuckled. The joke never got old for him, even if the townsfolk rarely laughed. Humor softened the world, and Belethor believed there was never too much softness in Skyrim. By the time he reached his home, the moon had climbed halfway up the sky, bathing the city in a pale glow that made Whiterun look almost unreal. As he stepped inside, he moved through his nightly routine with the same quiet grace he used in the shop, removing his boots, folding his coat, lighting a small candle by the bed. He sat for a few minutes in silence, listening to the muted hum of the night beyond his window. Whiterun slept like a creature breathing, shifting, dreaming. Belethor sometimes imagined he was the only one awake, a solitary witness to the city's softest hours. Before sleeping, he brought out a small ledger from beneath his bed. Not the shop ledger that one was purely for business, but a small, worn book filled with notes, sketches, and scribbled thoughts he would never show anyone. Tonight he added a single line: sold a wooden horse. Someone out there still believes in comfort. He closed the book slowly, as though sealing a secret, and placed it back in its hiding spot. When he finally lay down, the candle flickered gently against the wall, casting a warm light that danced like memories caught in motion. Belethor let his eyes drift shut as the city's nighttime symphony wrapped around him. Whiterun felt safe tonight, softer than usual, as though the wind had decided to let the people sleep without worry. And in that softness, Belethor allowed himself to drift into dreams. Dreams not of gold, not of trade, but of the simple, ordinary peace that came from knowing that tomorrow the shop would open again, the bell above the door would ring, and life in Whiterun would continue its quiet, familiar flow. Sometimes he wondered if that was the true secret of his little shop. Not the sales, not the bargaining, not the clever lines he delivered like a bard performing his favorite song. No, the real truth was that his shop gave the people of Whiterun a place where the world paused for a moment, where they could browse through forgotten objects and imagine new beginnings. He liked being part of that, even if he pretended otherwise. It made him feel woven into the city in a way he didn't often allow himself to admit. And as sleep finally settled over him, Belethor felt something warm in his chest, a gentle contentment that came from knowing he had done enough for one day, that he had played his small role in the living tapestry of Whiterun. The market would wake soon enough, the sun would rise over the plains, and the world would begin again. But for now, as candlelight dimmed and the merchant's breath slowed into peaceful rhythm, Whiterun held him close, the way familiar places always hold those who belong to them, even if they pretend they don't. Belethor's day always seems to stretch longer than he intends, as if the hours themselves bend around the rhythm of his business. Whiterun moves slowly in the late afternoon when the sun hangs low behind the Gildergreen and spills warm gold through the streets. The city begins to exhale, merchants easing into the last arc of their schedules, travelers settling in, guards shifting into quieter patrols. Belethor remains in his shop, letting that final wave of warm light settle across the shelves of cluttered curiosities and secondhand goods that shape his life more than he ever admits. He likes to pretend he keeps the store open simply to squeeze a few more coins out of wandering adventurers. But the truth is softer. Quieter, he stays open because he enjoys hearing footsteps drift through Whiterun's market long after other shops have closed. The world outside becomes slower, gentler, and in those hours he feels far less alone. When the sun begins to set, the shadows inside the shop angle themselves delicately across the floorboards. The dust motes turn amber in the fading light, drifting lazily like tiny memories floating between shelves. Belethor leans on the counter, listening to the comforting creak of wood beneath his elbows. The shop has grown familiar in ways most would never notice. A loose board near the door that groans whenever someone steps on it. The faint metallic jingle of an old lantern behind the counter. The smell of lavender oil from a cracked jar he refuses to throw away, despite never remembering where it came from. Even the clutter has its own rhythm, leaning toward the windows as if yearning for the sunlight that touches everything outside except the back corners of his store. Sometimes Ulfina Greymane stops by just as the sky begins to darken, offering idle conversation under the pretense of needing ink for her father's ledger or a bit of twine for old repairs. Belethor always expects her to be in a hurry, but she lingers with the sort of relaxed posture reserved for evenings when there's just enough warmth left in the day to unwind. Her laughter echoes gently off stone walls, wrapping around Belethor's shop with a softness that reminds him how much life hums quietly within Whiterun's everyday routines. When she leaves, the silence that returns is comforting rather than empty, like a quilt of calm settling over the store. Belethor mutters to himself as he sets items back on their shelves, both amused and grateful for the brief company. As twilight settles fully over the plains, a calm blue haze sweeps across the city. Belethor moves through his shop to light the lanterns one by one, striking the flint with practiced ease. The flickering flames dance across jars and crates, casting shadows that shift like wandering spirits. He's grown fond of the way firelight softens his cluttered collection of goods. The imperfections become charming, stories seem more vivid, and every battered trinket appears to glow with a little more life. Even the cracked pottery on his highest shelves looks noble in the warm, low light, as though it remembers the hands that shaped it long before it arrived in his keeping. With the lanterns burning steadily, Belethor locks the front door but leaves one shutter open just a crack. He likes hearing footsteps outside as the last of the merchants return home. The guards begin their evening rounds, and travelers shuffle toward the bannered mare for food and shelter. The sound of Whiterun at night is a lullaby of clinking armor, muffled voices, and the soft croak of nighthawks perched along the rooftops. Belethor listens to that chorus while tidying up the shop, humming faintly under his breath as he arranges items into their familiar yet nonsensical positions. His organization system looks chaotic to others, but Belethor finds comfort in it. Every item has its place, even if the logic behind it exists only in the winding thoughts of his memory. He pulls out the store ledger next, flipping through pages filled with transactions that blur together. Names he remembers mingle with names he doesn't. Adventurers who survived long enough to return with pockets full of loot, and others who swept through the city like passing winds, leaving no trace except a few coins exchanged across his counter. Sometimes Belethor wonders where they ended up, if they succeeded on their dangerous quests, or if their lives tapered into the vast unknown the way so many stories do. He doesn't dwell long, but the questions arrive like gentle taps on the edge of his thoughts, drifting away just as quietly as they came. In the stillness of the shop, a sense of nostalgia settles on him, though he never calls it that. Belethor has always been more sentimental than he lets on. He jokes about selling everything, even his sister, But deep down, the idea of losing any piece of his shop unsettles him. The shelves feel like chapters of a story he isn't finished telling yet. Every odd trinket is a reminder of someone's life, someone's struggle or triumph, someone's small moment in Skyrim's sprawling tapestry. He keeps these items because they feel like memories frozen in time. A chipped amulet from an overconfident mage, a scorched dagger recovered from a burned cabin, a child's wooden toy abandoned on a caravan trail. They weigh nothing in his hands but carry entire worlds behind them. When the night deepens and the cool breeze slips through the cracks in the shutters, Belethor prepares a simple meal. A loaf of bread, a small bowl of mountain flower stew, and occasionally a slice of goat cheese he traded from a traveler earlier that day. He eats with his back leaned against the counter, savoring the quiet of the shop at rest. The sounds outside continue their gentle rhythm, distant laughter from the bannered mare, the muted bark of a dog near the stables, the soothing hum of Whiterun settling for the night. These sounds become a blanket around him, a reminder that even in solitude, he is part of the city's living heartbeat. After dinner, he walks through the store once more, checking each lantern and adjusting items out of habit. He pauses frequently, fingers gently tracing the edges of worn goods. Some bring back memories of customers he liked, others remind him of days that felt heavier than most. But the store always grounds him. It's been his anchor in a world where everything else seems to shift like sand underfoot. He's not a warrior or a mage or a thief. He doesn't save kingdoms or chase dragons, but he keeps the wheels of Whiterun turning in his own small way, offering travelers what they need, providing goods to families, carving out their lives here, being another thread in the fabric of the city. On nights when sleep feels distant, Belethor sits on a stool by the back door, gazing into the quiet alley behind his shop. The moonlight bathes the stone walls in silver, and the shadows move softly as the night breeze flows through. He listens to the rustle of leaves from the Gildergreen far in the distance, imagining the great tree breathing beneath the moonlit sky. The stillness of that moment brings him a sense of peace he rarely finds during the day. He reflects on his past only in fragments, letting memories drift like leaves in water, things he left behind, roads he chose not to walk, dreams he outgrew without noticing. His life may appear simple to others, but inside, it's filled with quiet corners and soft reflections that shape him more than people realize. Eventually, Belethor stands and stretches, feeling the day's weight settling gently into his bones. He extinguishes each lantern slowly, watching the flames shrink into small glimmers before disappearing entirely. Darkness wraps around the shop with a tender hush, and Belethor makes his way to his small bed in the loft above the counter. The stairs creak beneath his steps, familiar and comforting. He settles into his blankets, listening for a moment to the muted pulse of Whiterun outside guards, chatting in low voices, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind carrying scents of pine and stone. He allows his eyes to drift closed, and for a brief few seconds, he feels suspended in that soft silence between waking and sleep. His thoughts float gently, drifting across images of the market, the faces he encountered, the glow of lanterns against the cluttered shelves, and the warm embrace of the city he calls home. Whiterun holds him the way it holds everyone who lives within its walls, quietly, steadily, softly, like a familiar story told each night before sleep. And Belethor, with all his quirks and complaints, belongs deeply to that story, wrapped in the quiet peace of a shop that breathes with its own gentle rhythm long after the lights go out. As the evening settles into Whiterun and the air cools beneath the lavender glow of the setting sun, Belethor moves through the last quiet hour of his day with an almost ritualistic rhythm. The market has closed. The city has relaxed into that soft in-between space where the day has ended, but the night hasn't quite arrived, and the world seems to breathe with slow, contented composure. Belethor likes this hour more than he admits. The clatter of the marketplace has faded away. The shouts of vendors have dissolved into the distance, and even the guards who wander the main path speak in softer voices, as though afraid to disturb the lingering warmth caught between the buildings. It's a peaceful lull he rarely shows anyone he appreciates, a part of the day that belongs entirely to him and the store he has tended for longer than most residents realize. Inside, the shop glows with lamplight, gold and amber flickering against shelves arranged with casual precision. Belethor takes a moment to tidy each section, sweeping subtle trails of dust, adjusting the angle of a goblet, straightening the spine of a book, as though an unseen customer might arrive just before closing, and he'd want everything to feel perfect. The store is quiet now, the kind of quiet that carries the memory of conversations spoken throughout the day. If he stands still long enough, he can almost feel the residue of each visitor: the farmer with a cart problem he couldn't solve, the adventurer who tried selling him a cracked shield at triple its worth, or the Alikar warrior who stepped in only to leave after a knowing glance passed between them. Belethor treasures these echoes more than he lets on. They remind him that business isn't just about gold, it's about the small movements of life drifting through the door. He checks the ledger next, running his finger down neat rows of numbers recorded in a flowing script he rarely shows in public. There's comfort in the bookkeeping, a quiet order that contrasts with the unpredictability of customers. He hums softly as he calculates profits, balancing sales against purchases, noting what he'll need to restock tomorrow. Some days bring great earnings, others conflict or amusement, but nights like this bring a sense of calm that gold can't buy. Belethor finds himself smiling faintly, not because the ledger looks good, but because the numbers remind him that he survived another busy day. In a city where dragons circle the sky and war stirs beneath calm surfaces, simply ending a day with a locked door and coin in the drawer is its own kind of triumph. While he prepares to close, he steps into the back room where he keeps items too heavy, too valuable, or too troublesome to display. The back room holds the story of his career: imports from Solitude, oddities purchased from wandering Khajiit caravans, unsold relics from adventurers who never returned. There's a shield from Markarth that still carries faint traces of Dwemer oil, a sapphire he refuses to display because no one ever offers the right price. And in the corner, wrapped in cloth, a strangely carved box he bought years ago and never opened. These are pieces of a life built from small decisions, tiny gambles, and endless curiosity. Every merchant has a vault of secrets. Belethor's is just less dramatic than he sometimes pretends. He checks each lock with practiced hands, tugging lightly on chains, nudging crates into stable positions, and making sure nothing too valuable sits in the open. As he organizes everything into neat rows, he remembers why he likes this work. Some people crave danger, others crave praise, but Belethor craves the certainty of things he can touch. A lock that clicks, a balance sheet that lines up, a coin that sings with a pure ring when it hits the table. The world outside his door is shaped by ancient legends and quests beyond his interest, but inside his shop, the rules are simple: fair price, good merchandise. Doors open at sunrise, close when the lamps burn low. When he returns to the main room, the store feels smaller than it does during the day. The shadows stretch longer between the shelves. The warm glow from the lantern flickers in soft pulses, and the scent of polished wood floats in the air. The stillness has a weight to it, a gentle reassurance that everything has a place. Belethor walks the aisle one more time, brushing his fingertips lightly against the edge of drawers and the tops of display cases. He checks the balance of a dagger leaning on a rack, adjusting its angle so it catches the lantern light just right, giving it a little extra shine for tomorrow's customers. It's a habit rooted in pride rather than vanity, an instinct to ensure the first impression of the store always feels welcoming. He sits for a moment at the counter, leaning back in the chair he's repaired more times than he can count. The shop crackles softly as the lantern flickers, and the wooden beams creak the way old buildings often do when the day finally releases its tension. Belethor closes his eyes, listening to the quiet breath of the store. He hears faint footsteps outside, guards patrolling, a stray cat weaving between crates, perhaps someone stumbling home from the bannered mare. But inside, everything remains still. The walls hold the warmth of the day, and the air carries the faint hint of spices from the rare goods he keeps behind the counter. It's peaceful here in a way few people ever see, a sanctuary well beyond the bustle of open hours. When the time feels right, he rises, stretching the subtle stiffness from his shoulders. He moves to the door and looks out into the cool evening air, seeing Whiterun bathed in deep blues and gentle purples. The torches lining the streets glow with soft halos, lighting the path that curves toward the market and then up toward Dragon's Reach. In the distance, the towering palace glows faintly beneath the sky, its silhouette sharp but comforting, like the spine of a long-resting dragon watching over the city. Belethor has always believed Whiterun feels safer at night than during the day, not because danger avoids darkness, but because the city settles into a calmer version of itself. Merchants sleep, guards find their rhythm, and the wind drifts quietly between the stone walls. He locks the door with a firm click, adding the metal bar across the frame for extra security. Then he presses his palm against the wood for a moment, feeling the lingering warmth from the interior. There's something grounding about closing the shop like a chapter ending, a small victory sealed away until dawn. He pockets the key, feeling the familiar weight against his hip, and steps back onto the quiet street. The night air carries a coolness that brushes lightly across his face, refreshing after the heat of lantern-lit rooms and constant conversation. He walks slowly, not out of exhaustion but out of appreciation for the rare stillness. He passes the empty stalls of the marketplace, each one holding its own silent story. The stall where Ysolda sells flowers, still smelling faintly of petals. The space where Arcadia buys her herbs, though tonight the tables sit bare and clean. The blacksmith's forge sits quiet for the first time since morning, embers dimming to a soft glow beneath cooling metal. Whiterun feels like a sleeping creature, and Belethor, walking through its quiet breaths, feels like one of the small thoughts drifting through its dreaming mind. As he approaches his home, he pauses to glance once more at the sky. The stars gleam clearly above, crisp and cold against the deep velvet night. Belethor lingers for a heartbeat longer, standing near the steps leading to his door. The world feels peaceful tonight, held in a gentle balance he doesn't often experience amid the noise of daily trade. He thinks about the people he'll see tomorrow, the items he'll appraise, the laughter and haggling that will fill the store, and the comforting repetition of life in a city that thrives on routine. It's not glory, nor adventure, nor fame, but it is his place in Skyrim, a small, steady heartbeat in the center of a vast, unpredictable world. He steps inside, closing the door softly behind him. The quiet envelops him once more, but this time it's the comforting quiet of home, a space where he can finally let go of the merchant's posture and simply exist as himself. Tomorrow will bring new deals, new stories, and new chaos, but tonight belongs to rest. Belethor sets aside the day's worries, letting them drift into the gentle darkness. Outside, Whiterun sleeps. Inside, the world grows soft, and somewhere in the silence, the faint glow of lamplight flickers like a warm promise that another peaceful night has begun.